Hello everyone, this is basically until now brought 3 explanations why to say korbanot every single day. Number 1, it's just a means to dividing your Torah learning into thirds. Number 2, it's specifically the laws of korbanot, but in place of bringing korbanot, we learn the laws of korbanot. And number 3, it's a verbal recitation, which literally stands in place of korbanot. It's not just learning about them, but it's literally in place of them. Is there any ramification between these explanations? The answer is there are many. And let's start right at the beginning. You have to understand what you learn. Obviously, you can't learn Torah and say, I learned Torah if you didn't understand the word. And indeed, Rabbeinu Bechaye, in his beautiful interpretation on the Torah, actually says very explicitly that when you say korbanot, it's not enough just to say it. Quoting his words, Ki ein lomar, do not even think of saying, Shetiyeh kavana, sheyehagev yigros l'shon haparsha bepsukei ha'arumim bilbad, mibeli sheitbonen bepirusham. That you'll look at these verses, you'll see these verses, but they will be literally naked because you have no interpretation, you don't understand the word you're saying. Rather, at the end of the day, you have to understand what you said. And the one who spells it out is the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah, who we quoted, said that you cannot on Tisha B'Av say korbanot because you're not allowed to learn Torah, assuming that's the reason. Indeed says, Ve'en kriyat perek zeh uvraita zo ola limud mishnah v'talmud el l'misha mevin. If you want this to work, based on the explanation that it's learning Torah, you have to understand what you say. And therefore, l'misha ino mevin, whoever doesn't understand it will indeed not be able to get the fulfillment of the promise that God said it would be in place of korbanot. And then he says very explicitly, don't think for a moment that this is davening. It's in the siddur, but it's not davening. The dafka b'tfilah misheino mevin HaKadosh Baruch Hu yoda kavanato. In davening itself, even if you just say the words and you mean to daven, but you don't understand each word that you're saying, God knows what you really have in your heart, and there's no problem to daven without understanding. Aval im omer hamishna v'habraita meino mevin eino nikra limud. But if you quote a mishnah, if you quote a beraita, if you quote a gemara, if you quote a pasuk and you don't understand it, then it's meaningless. Therefore, if indeed the explanation is it's learning Torah, you have to understand every word you say, and it's not surprising that indeed the Mishnah Berurah comes along and says in the name of the Shalah that when you say Bameh Madlikin Friday night, or you say Ezu Mekaman every morning, or you say Rabbi Yishmael, Ya'aseh kol nigun de Mishnayos. Whatever way you learn Mishnayos, that's the way you should say it, not in a nigun of davening. The one who disagrees with him is Rav Chaim Palaji. Rav Chaim Palaji, who was a rabbi, a very important rabbi in Turkey. Rav Chaim Palaji, who wrote endless books during his years of 1788 to 1868. One of the books he wrote was a responsum called Lev Chaim. And he quotes from someone I never heard of called the Dimat Zal in a book called Sofnat Paneach, not to be mixed up with the Rogatchover's book, in which he says that according to the Gemara that says that you just say it and it's good enough, the mashma kriya ba'alma. Good enough to say it. You don't have to be a Talmid Chacham. Anyone that says it, the magic works. So the first ramification is that you have to understand what you read. If the explanation is learning Torah, yes. If the explanation is it's just a verbal recitation in place of korbanot, then obviously the answer will be no. The second ramification is going to be, can a Talmid Chacham who knows how to learn something else? Instead of learning korbanot, he'll take out a Bava Metzia, or he'll take out some other tractate of the Gemara and not say the korbanot. So indeed, the Divrei Chamudot. The Divrei Chamudot was the Tosfos Yom Tov, who wrote endless Perushim and on the Mishnah, endless Perushim on the Rosh, one of them called Divrei Chamudot on Masechet Brachot, comes along and says that indeed, whoever knows how to learn and knows properly how to learn, indeed, he has to say Psukei de Zimra, he has to daven, but when it comes to the korbanot, he doesn't have to say the korbanot and learn them, but rather, instead of them, learn something else. Rav Chaim Palaji, who I already just quoted, actually agrees with him, and indeed says, indeed, if you're a Talmid Chacham, you don't have to dafka learn these particular passages. You can learn other passages. That, of course, goes with the explanation that it's just learning Torah, and it's just a means to divide it up into 333. That being the case, obviously, you don't have to dafka learn the laws of Korbanot. I want to just add that Rav Yair Bachrach, who wrote the famous book Chavot Yair, also wrote a book called Mekor Chaim that just recently came out in the last few years. They finally found the manuscript and they put it out. Rav Yair Bachrach, actually writes something very important. In essence, he agrees with the Lechem Chamudot that indeed, because the reason is learning Torah, you can learn anything. But, he says, no one got to that level today. Quoting his words, that's only people that learn all the time and are constantly involved in learning. Rav Yair Bachrach, who lived about 300 years ago, actually says, in my generation, we no longer have people like this. They don't learn all the time. Sometimes they stop and they battle in the Beis Medrash. Sometimes they go out for a little walk. Sudata Reshut, they sometimes even nash. Obviously, he agrees with the Lechem Chamudot and Rav Chaim Palaji later, but says we don't have students like this today. There's no Talmidei Chachamim, so in essence, everyone has to say the Korbanot. The first Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Shulchan Aruch Harav, Rav Shneur Zalman Miladi, indeed he says that in essence, a middle position. You can learn anything you want except for Parshat HaTamid. Indeed, he says, if you know how to learn, then learn anything you want. But in Simon Memchet, later on, he says, Nahagu kol Yisrael vekavu chova al atzman likod parshat hatamid. So he makes a distinction between the Korban Tamid part of the davening and the rest of the Korbanot. The Korban Tamid part, which we'll get back to later, indeed, everyone has to say, but the rest of the Korbanot, you can learn whatever you want. Finally, the Shibolei HaLeket disagrees. The Shibolei HaLeket was one of the Rishonim. And he quotes his brother, Rav Binyamin, who writes the following. Rav Binyamin said, how come we don't say the Korban Tamid in davening? Since davening is supposed to be in place of the Korbanot, they're actually patterned time-wise based on when the Korbanot were brought. How come we don't say in davening every day the Parshat HaTamid? In the middle of Shmona Esrei, we should have said it. Says Rav Binyamin, the brother of the Shibolei HaLeket, that this proves that saying it before davening is not an option, but an obligation. God said, either bring the korbanot or say it. Kriyat Parshat Tamid Chovat Teda Lecha Shu Kein Sharei Ein Maskirin Parshat Tamid Batfilah Kemo Shemaskirin Psukei Musafin B'Tfilat Musaf. In Musaf, we go ahead and talk about the korbanot of the day. We don't say that, oh, by the way, every morning before the added sacrifices for Shabbos or for Yantiv or for Rosh Chodesh, they brought a Korban Tamid. Why? Because we said it before Psukei de Zimra. It's in the Siddur. So the third ramification is going to be women. Women are not obligated in learning Torah. They can volunteer. Obviously, they should learn what they need in order to be a wonderful Jewish woman in this world. And of course, I personally encourage it. But they're not obligated. So from this perspective, do they have to say Korbanot? The Shulchan Aruch, Rav Yosef Karo says, in the name of the Agur, that indeed, a woman has to say Birkat Torah every morning. That's what he paskins at the end of chapter 47 in his Code of Jewish Law. And he brings two explanations. One of the two is that they say Korbanot. And since they say Korbanot, part of the Torah, they have to say Birkat Torah first before uttering the words of the Torah. Literally saying that ultimately Korbanot is part of davening. Women are going to daven. And therefore, it's a verbal recitation and not learning Torah. However, Rav Yaakov Emden and the Tehillah LeDavid, who's a little less known, he was a great posek who died in 1910, Rav David Unterberg, but we don't know too much about his personal life. He was very humble. They ultimately both say around the same thing, and that is that women shouldn't have been obligated to daven because it's time bounded. But they do daven simply because it's rachme, as the Gemara says. They need to ask for mercy from God, and therefore they have to daven. That being the case, it's only davening. But don't start obligating them and saying sacrifices. After all, no female actually sacrificed the sacrifices. From time to time, women were obligated in sacrifices, but they didn't sacrifice it. In their words, Ma'anu korin pashat tamid she'aleh aleinu ki yikrav leKoran tamid ein lanashim shayachut b'zeh. The fact that we say the korban tamid part because we don't have a korban tamid, there's no connection to women. Obviously, if you say it's like learning Torah, it wouldn't be something that women would be obligated in. But if you say it's Beis HaMikdash based, then obviously women were in the Beis HaMikdash, in the sense of when a Kohen brought a korban tamid, he brought it on behalf of all the Jewish people, which was men, women, and children. So the Shulchan Aruch's perspective seems to be very clear. Korbanot is a verbal recitation. It's part of davening. It's in place of sacrifices. And therefore, you could say it on Tisha B'Av. However, others disagree. They say it's a means to learn Torah. And therefore, A, maybe a Talmud Chacham who's learning anyway doesn't have to say it. B, maybe he can learn something else in place of it. And C, women would not be obligated. God willing, tomorrow we'll go on with a few more ramifications.